3 physical books, 4 audiobooks, and 2 DNFs. Let's speak about my main reading wrap up. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you had a good reading month, reading week, reading weekend, whatever it is. Let's get into it and not waste any time. My 5-star read of the month was Homegoing. What an incredible book. Absolutely recommended. This is based on the slave trade in Ghana, and it's told through the perspective of 2 sisters, and it goes on to even tell the story intergenerationally or multi-generationally. In terms of the 2 sisters, there's a difference between them in that one sister is sold into slavery and one sister marries a slave master. And what I have to say is that after reading this book, I was very curious about the history of Ghana, but it was also not easy to engage with the material. It was incredibly hard to engage with it, especially parts of the books that detail the treatment and the living conditions of the slaves. It was absolutely terrible. I had to take a break. I read this book over 2 months because of that. It was so heartbreaking to really engage with, but it made me more curious about Ghana's history. What I also found interesting is that this book for me drove home the message that your blackness remains despite your proximity to whiteness or to white people, because even though the other sister was married to a slave master, she was still treated as a black person. She was still looked at as being less than, as not being human, as just being below, as just deserving the absolutely most disgusting treatment. And this book, like I said, it unpacks the story across several generations. I will have to say, even though I enjoyed how the story was told across several generations, at some point of it, it felt a little bit incoherent for me and a bit disorientating because of that. But then I thought again, perhaps that's what the experience was like for people who were living during those times and experienced slavery, either from the side of marrying a slave master or being sold into slavery, that your life story is not going to be coherent. Your life story is going to be heavily informed by trauma, and because of that, it's going to be incoherent. It's not going to be a linear timeline. It's going to be hard to retell your story in those circumstances. Like I said, it was absolutely heartbreaking, but this was my 5-star read of the month. I absolutely recommend it. I think it's such a necessary book to read and engage with. Not easy, and I'm glad that the author didn't shy away from us readers being uncomfortable. It's history. History is not supposed to make us feel comfortable. It's supposed to make us feel unsettled and question things and not want certain things to repeat themselves. Another interesting point that this book highlighted for me was the role that certain tribes in Ghana played into the slave trade and what was happening with people sold into slavery. And that was quite interesting to engage with. Then I read Nearly All the Men in Lagos Are Mad. It's 12 short stories that detail falling in love in Lagos. And after reading this book, I was like, okay, so Lagos is not a place to fall in love. Maybe it's a place for business. Maybe it's a place for opportunities. Maybe it's a place for art, for culture, but definitely not falling in love. The 12 short stories are so different, but I think they do carry across several themes that are different. And because it's short stories, I can't really detail the stories because it would be giving them away. But what I have to tell you is that the last story absolutely broke my heart. I was gutted, I was sad, I cried. The stories are all sad. They will make you angry, they will make you frustrated. You will have a problem with some of the characters, and I think it includes themes such as religion, family, um, people that are trying to climb the ladder in terms of their careers, money, friendships. There's so many themes, abuse that these stories really do cover, and perhaps things that are complicated. But I think with the stories is that they don't just stop in Lagos. I think these are the type of stories that you can find anywhere in the world and things that people have experienced or experienced things similar to them. I give this book a 4-star, and this is a book that I would also recommend. I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and honestly, going to this book, I really didn't know what to expect. I was intrigued by the title because I was like, Seven Husbands, what's happening there? But this book told way more than Evelyn Hugo's 7 marriages because it does detail them and break them down. This book for me told a story of a teenager who was desperate to make it out of her hometown, to go no contact with certain family members, to make it into Hollywood, to make herself proud, to make her mother proud, also sustain a career in Hollywood and create a household name for herself. It starts off well into the 1950s, and it told the story of what is it like not having money, not having connections, wanting to break through into the Hollywood market and sustain that breakthrough, but also making it there. Besides not having money, not having connections, being a person who's not white. It speaks about the sacrifices that Evelyn had to make, parts of herself that she had to let go to make it into the industry, to be accepted into the industry, to sustain herself in the industry, the sacrifices. However, my only concern with this book was that I felt like it brought up so many important themes, themes that were so rich, but the themes are not fully unpacked. I felt like with this author, there was perhaps maybe concern about the reader and not wanting to make the reader uncomfortable, or it was a bit frustrating because at some points it felt like the book lacked depth. To be quite honest, there's so much that could have been unpacked, that could have been discussed, it could have went deeper and deeper, but at some point it just fell flat. So it's a 4 star. I would recommend it, but just be, I guess, mindful that a lot of things are going to come up, things that are very rich, very important, things that are relatable to the society, but they're not really explored like to a level of like 100%. And like I said, I listen to 4 audiobooks. I listen to Judge Stone. That is a yes for me. This is the story that has to do with a judge who has to oversee a case where a doctor in Alabama performed an abortion on a 13-year-old, and it is against the law. And there's a lot of interference that the judge has to face, political interference, interference from family, from friends, from religious leaders. But the covering this case also brings up a lot for the judge in their personal lives, and also when you want them to take a stand, how certain powers try to threaten you and intimidate you into not taking a stand. This book was about that. I thoroughly did enjoy listening to it. I did wish, although, that some parts about Judge Stone were different, certain characteristics and experiences, but I guess it made sense. But it also felt quite expected in that sense. Also listened to The Perfect Child by Lucinda Berry. I honestly did not enjoy this one. I think I keep thinking my rating is between 3 and 4, and me giving it a 4 is me being kind. This is a story about 2 healthcare workers, a doctor and his wife, who's a nurse. They work at the same hospital. They've been trying to have a child. They're struggling. A child comes into the hospital under a very severe condition that is not good because they'd been abused and like really, really neglected. The doctor has a lot of compassion and empathy towards the child, takes interest in the child. They decide to foster the child, and then they want the child in their family long term. And he doesn't anticipate the responsibility that it's going to take to bring a child who's been through so much and have them function as part of your household and part of your family. But his wife does. So there's this, like, I guess his wife is more realistic compared to him, and it's not easy. And in the end, he finds himself in the middle between his wife and his children and having to make hard decisions. Yeah, this book for me felt like it was building up to something, but it took so long to build up to something that it became predictable, and then it just fell flat. And because of that, it wasn't thrilling. So that's why I didn't enjoy it. And my rating is between a 3 and a 4. I haven't really made up my mind about it. So yeah. And I listened to Only for the Week. I absolutely love Only for the Week. It's a romance book. It has to do with Janelle. She's a maid of honor. She's going to her sister's wedding. It's a destination wedding in Tulum, Mexico. And her sister's an absolute bridezilla. But there's also this underlying tension between her and her sister, as well as her mother, because there are some family things that they haven't sorted out, haven't spoken about, and they're each struggling with their bit of that thing, their portion rather of that family tension and things that have happened, things that they haven't unpacked and spoken about. And it does show up while they're going off to the wedding, at least in the week before the guests arrive. And Janelle just wants to unwind, she wants to relax. And there comes the best man. Oh, an important point I didn't touch on. Her sister's husband to be is her ex-boyfriend, but Janelle doesn't care. She's over him. They're not compatible. She's like, whatever. I don't care about that. But now she's something bruised between her as the maid of honor and the best man. But now there's a bit of a problem. Is the best man is the ex-boyfriend's best friend? It's a bit complicated, but you get me. And he becomes her safe space. Wow, the interlude, and he's just perfect. He's just perfect. He's perfect. Okay. He becomes her safe space, And yeah, you just, when you're reading the book, you're just like, okay, how is this gonna end? You want the best for both of them, but you also understand the complicated dynamics that are happening. Also listened to Cutthroat, and that is the most toxic book I've ever listened to. That book was messed up. This has to do with a woman running into a boyfriend. He's sitting there with another woman eating steak after telling her that he's vegetarian, and she's been going home cooking two separate meals every day because he's supposed to be vegetarian, and he's eating steak on a date with another woman. But she's also so shocked because there's close proximity between her and this woman. And when she sees this, she doesn't react, she doesn't do anything. Instead, she goes home, she plots her revenge, and it is very sick. Her revenge is very sick, but there's also very disturbing family dynamics from her side, from his side. This book is just crazy. You just have to go into it as blind as possible. I had my jaw on the floor from the first page to the last page. It's absolutely insane. And then let's speak about the two books that I'm nervous to speak about, because I have two DNFs, and these books are everybody's favorites and their grandmother's favorites. I just want to put a disclaimer. I am the problem. I am the problem. But I will say, maybe I need to read the physical books. Maybe the problem is that I listen to the audios and maybe the audios are not great. Or you know what? I'm just a problem overall. But the two books that I DNF'd in May, it's Fourth Wing and Project Hail Mary. I know. I've been listening to these books over 2 months on Audible, and I just couldn't enjoy them. I really, really tried. They were just not landing. But I have to say, they're both genres that I was trying to explore, sci-fi and fantasy, and it just didn't land. But I still want to explore the two genres, and hopefully something will appeal to me. But these two I didn't. For now, they are hard DNFs. Maybe I will think about reading physical copies later in the year. What did you read in May? What did you listen to? What did you DNF? I'd love to hear all about it. And from the books that I liked, do you have any book recommendation? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.